Ay. Hoy, sabihin mo kung okay na, bigyan mo ako ng signal. Hoy!
Okay lang.
Good morning, everyone. Good morning, Sir Mustales, as well as good morning to our classmates. Did you already have your breakfast na ba? If hindi pa, sige na, mag-breakfast na kayo, kaso nga lang, habang nakikinig kayo sa aming discussion. So, okay, hello, good morning. We are the Group 4, and as well as the last group that will be reporting for this semester. And for today, for our last topic, we will be discussing the social psychology of helping and politics. But to be able to have an overview of what is this chapter all about, the reporters will discuss the following. First is the social psychology of helping, under which is the theories of helping, when will we help, who will help, and how do we increase helping. Second is the political psychology in the Philippines, under of which is the political culture as well as the psychology of corruption in the Philippines. And third and last is the Filipino style electoral behaviors and political attitudes, under of which is the political parties, the personality and leadership, the social influence of the church in politics, and last is the women in politics. So, now to start off the presentation, let us have Mr. Cabunyan, Gerald, Banta to take on the presentation.
Hello, I am Boon, and this is my presentation. So here are the academic theories about how we seek to help other people. Contact hypothesis, bringing enemies together to increase understanding. We help to make world peace. For example, helping kids resolve their issues by making yourself a villain to make them rely on each other just to be cute. Second is equity theory. We are happiest when give and take are equal. We help people kasi dati rin tayong tinulungan. Empathy altruism hypothesis. If we feel empathy, we are likely to help. Most commonly sa mga pulubi na may nakakaawang appearance or persuasive na mga looks. Identifiable victim effect. Empathizing with one or more than many. Mas mataas ang chance na magbigay tayo ng tulong sa isang person in need kaysa sa milyong tao na may same need. For example, tulungan ng libu-libong batang nagugutom sa Maynila. Yung isa naman ay si Eric ay 13 taong gulang na batang nakatira sa Estero de Manila. Wala na daw silang makain ng kapatid niya, kaya naman nang hihingi siya ng tulong sa aming programa. Next is love. There are several styles of love. It's a basic addiction to help someone we love. Politeness theory. We act politely or rudely depending on whether we care. We all have two faces, the positive and the negative one. So we show positive face for us to be respected or treated politely, but we show our negative face for the people that may push us around. This is the negative facade of helping, because in this theory, we just help for personal reasons or to make our positive face stand out. Next is pro-social behavior. We sometimes help without need for reward. This type of helping varies heavily in context. For example, we help others para mamana ng susunod na generations yung good behavior na nakikita sa magulang. Pro-social behavior ay nakabase rin sa gender. Heroic ang mga lalaki pero saglit lang, samantalang sa babae naman ay tahimik na pagtulong pero matagal. Mood. Pag masaya ka, mas mataas ang chance na magpakalat ka ng happiness. By helping others compared sa malungkot ka, mas maliit yung chance mo na tumulong. And population densities. Mas mataas ang tsansa na matulungan ang isang maliit na community, magtulungan ang isang maliit na community kaysa sa malalaking cities. Next is social exchange theory. Perception of relation depends on fairness. Perception. We help others a little because we are helped before, but we tend to maximize the benefits and decrease the cost. When you were just a little boy, your uncle gives you an elegant toys as birthday presents. But when you had your niece and nephews, we only give them small cheap toys as a present. Next is Stockholm Syndrome, becoming attached to captors. In 1975, a movie named Dog Day Afternoon is a movie about a three-man robbing a bank. In this film, the captives, which is the employees of the bank, sided and helped the perpetrators. Because of sympathy towards the young men, this can also be seen in housewives that is defending their abusive husbands. This is because they are acting in a sympathetic way in order to seek mercy from their captors. This may then change their belief in order to sustain internal consistency between actions and belief. In short, they do it because of fear or transference of the captor's belief to the victims. Reciprocity norm. We need to return another's favor. Reciprocity norm na tutulungan mo yung matanda kasi balang araw matanda ka rin. Hoping na may tutulong din sa'yo. That's it.
Okay, so let's talk about when do we help or the situational influences. So the following 6 topics are the things one must know as to when do people really help each other. Hindi pa ako.
Yes, sir.
So first is time pressure. Our good intentions of helping those in need can sometimes conflict with other motivations. One such source of conflict is time pressure. When we are in a hurry or have a lot on our minds, we may be so preoccupied that we fail to notice others who need help, become less likely to accept responsibility for helping someone, or decide that the cost of helping others are too high because of the precious time that will be lost. Additionally, when we have other demands on us that seem very important, getting involved in someone else's problems may seem like a luxury we can't afford. Next, location. If the presence of others often inhibits helping, individuals have a worse chance of being helped in an emergency in a big city with its hectic pace and large crowds than in a small town. Although the place of residence does not seem to affect how much those in close relationship help each other. So in general, people are less likely to help strangers in urban areas than in rural ones. This relationship has also been found in several countries around the world, and personally I think that helping based on location also relies on the familiarity of the place. Next is culture. Around the world as well, some cities seem to have more helpful citizens than others. The other variable that predicted helping concerned the notion of what is called simpatia in Spanish or simpático in Portuguese. Some researchers report that this is an important element of Spanish and Latin American cultures and involve a concern for the social well-being of others. So similar to us, we Filipinos are helpful by nature since being matulungin sa kapwa is somewhat kind of a cornerstone of being a proud Filipino. On the other hand, Japanese people, okay, maybe it's not as accurate as it seems to be, but take it with a grain of salt. Japanese people and their culture tends to be a bit selfish in terms of helping each other, due to their culture being do not meddle with others' affairs. I could be wrong, but out of 144 countries, Japan ranked 142 on being helpful to strangers. Next is mood. So helping someone can put people in a better mood, but being in a good mood increases people's likelihood of helping someone in one way or another. Additionally, did you know that sunshine can boost people's generosity? Over the course of a year, pedestrians in Minneapolis, Minnesota were stopped and asked to participate in a survey of social opinions. So when Michael Cunningham, back in 1979, tabulated the responses according to the weather condition, he discovered that people answered more questions on sunny days than on cloudy ones. Moving his investigation indoors, Cunningham found that sunshine is truly golden. The more the sun was shining, the more generous the tips left by restaurant customers were. Sunshine and health seems to go together, but what's the connection? Probably it's the mood we're in. As On sunny day cheers since sunny day cheers us up and a cloudy day dumps us down. Similarly, Robert Barron on 1997 believed that pleasant scents put people in a good mood, and he wondered if this good mood would make them more likely to help someone in need. He tested this with a passerby in a large shopping mall in Albany, New York. Each selected passerby was approached by a member of the research team and asked for change for a dollar. This interaction took place in a location containing either strong pleasant odors or no discernible odor. So people approached in pleasant smelling location were much more likely to help than people approached in a neutral smelling location. Barron also found that people were in better mood when they were in pleasant smelling environments. This effect on their mood appears to have caused their greater tendency to help. So very similar results were found by Nicholas Gogan back in 2012 in a recent replication in a monk in Rennes, France. Next is pro-social media effects. Sorry. Politicians, educators, researchers, and parents have voiced strong concerns for decades about the negative effects of the media, such as TV, movies, music lyrics, videos, and more recently, video games, on the attitudes and behavior of adolescents and young adults. Douglas Gentile and others back in 2009 conducted a series of studies using very different methods and across different cultures to test the idea that playing video games featuring characters who help and support each other in nonviolent ways can make people more likely to behave in pro-social ways. Seeing characters act in helpful cooperative ways in popular media can serve to be a model for social behavior, particularly if the behavior is rewarded or associated with a well-liked character. Supporting this idea are the results of meta-analysis of 34 studies involving more than 5,000 children. Dami. So this analysis found a reliable positive effect of pro-social television on children's pro-social behavior, especially when specific acts of altruism were modeled on TV. Lastly, role models and social norms. The finding of the relation between pro-social television and children's real pro-social behavior illustrates that the power of role models. Helpful models are important not only for children, but for all of us. Observing helpful models increase helping in a variety of situations. So ask yourself, why do people who exemplify helping inspire us to do so? So three reasons stand out. First, they provide an example of behavior for us to imitate directly. Second, when they are rewarded for their helpful behavior, people who model helping behavior teach us that helping is valued and rewarded, which strengthens our inclination to be helpful. Third, the behavior of these models makes us think about and become more aware of the standards of conduct in our society. So, social norms, there are three. The norms of reciprocity establishes a strong socially approved standard, which is people who give to you should be paid back. Next one, the norm of equity prescribes that when people are in a situation in which they feel over-benefited, they should help those who are under-benefited. Lastly, the norm of social responsibility, which dictates that people should help those who need assistance, when people are more motivated by concerns about justice or fairness. However, their intentions to help someone will be driven more by their belief that this person deserves their assistance than by their belief that he or she simply needs it. Okay, so now let's talk about who do we need to help or the person that influences. The first one would be the perceived characteristics of person in need. First one would be the attractiveness. So attractive people are more likely to be offered help and cooperation across several different settings, whether it be asking for direction at campus, playing a game that could be either competitive or cooperative, or requesting money in a health emergency. So in addition to physical attractiveness, interpersonal attractiveness is also related to receiving more help. Certainly, one explanation for this is that people help attractive others in hope of establishing some kind of relationship with an attractive person. At- Attributions of responsibility. People are more likely to help someone in need if they think that the person shouldn't be held responsible for his or her predicament. If they think, even unjustifiably, that the person can be blamed for his or her situation, they are less likely to help them. So, in layman's terms, if di niya kasalanan, dapat siyang tulungan. Pag kasalanan niya, deserve, ka. So, may chance pa rin ng tulungan, pero less likely na. So, next one, a little help for our friends and others like us. So, as we would expect, people are usually more helpful to those they know and care about than to strangers or superficial acquaintances. So, people in communal relationships, such as close friends or romantic partners, feel mutual responsibility for each other's needs. People in an exchange relationship, such as acquaintances or business associates, give help with the expectation of receiving comparable benefits in return. So, for example, if I help you move your furniture, you better give me a ride to the airport. So, whether they are friends or strangers, we are more likely to help others who are similar to us. All kinds of similarities though. So from dress to attitudes to nationality increases our willingness to help, and signs of dissimilarity decreases it. So there are probably several reasons underlying these effects. And for one thing, we are more likely to be attracted to and develop relationships with people who are similar to ourselves. In addition, people tend to empathize more with similar others or with people in their in-groups. So next one, culture and who receives help. People are less likely to help if they think that a person is responsible for his or her plight. So Elizabeth Mullen and Linda Skitka back in 2009 proposed that this may be a stronger influence on helping in an individualist culture where individuals may be expected to have more control over their fates than in a collectivist one. So there also may be cultural differences in seeking help. Hee-Jung Kim and others back in 2012, for example, observed that Asians and Asian Americans report seeking social support less than European Americans do. This greater resistance to seeking help among Asians and Asian Americans may be due to greater concerns about shame, receiving criticism, and hurting the relationship with the person or people whom they would ask for help. Indeed, Shelley Taylor and others in 2007 found that seeking and receiving social support from close others are more stressful, both psychologically and physiologically, to Asians and Asian American students. Lastly, the helping connection. A consistent theme that appears repeatedly in this topic is the sense of connection. This connection has taken various forms, from genetic relatedness, empathetic concern, sense of responsibility for someone, perceived similarity, shared group membership, and so on. So the relationship between helping and interpersonal connection runs like a bright thread. Okay, so let's have an example. People are prone to help their kin in group members and people with whom they have close or reciprocal relationship. In an emergency, bystanders who know the victim or know each other are more likely to intervene. People who respond empathetically to another's suffering and consider the plight of others in their own moral reasoning are more likely to help than others. Lastly, perceived similarity increases helping.
So, how do we increase helping? Encourage pro-social helping behavior. People often act to benefit other people, and these acts are example of pro-social behavior. Such behavior may come in many guises: helping an individual in need, sharing personal resources, volunteering time, effort, and expertise, cooperating with others to achieve some common goals. Number two is increase and optimize the 5 decision-making steps. So the 5 steps decision that we need to increase and optimize are: identify your goal. One of the most effective decision-making strategies is to keep an eye on your goal. Gather information for weighing your option. Gathering enough information will help you analyze all possible outcomes and make the best decision. Brainstorm all possible alternatives. Use the information you gathered in the previous step to generate as many solutions as you can, helping to identify the best alternatives. Consider the consequences. Evidence shows that helping others can also benefit our own mental health and well-being. For example, it can reduce stress as well as improve mood, self-esteem, and happiness. Make your decision. Making better decision leads to better result and fewer repercussion. Better decision might leave you with more option and flexibility. Conversely, a good decision might shut off other option but open up a new opportunity. When you make better decision, it also means you're learning from your mistake. And last is evaluate your decision. Evaluating outcomes may help the decision maker learn lessons that will improve her decision making abilities. Self-esteem is an important factor in evaluating results because it may lead to decision makers viewing the result of their decision with favorable bias. Number 3, reduce inhibiting factors, pluralistic ignorance, and conformity. Fortunately, pluralistic ignorance can be dispelled and its negative consequences elevated through education. For example, students who learn that support for heavy drinking practices is not as widespread as they thought drink less themselves and feel more comfortable with the decision not to drink. Number 4, increase identification of risk factors. Knowing the risk you and your family may face can help you find ways to avoid health problems. It can also keep you from fretting over unlikely threats. Knowing the risk and benefit of a medical treatment can help you to make informed decisions. Number 5 is make in-group more inclusive. Inclusive communities are safe communities and communities encourage intellectual curiosity, respectful dialogue, personal growth, working towards these goals, and working on our own personal growth, models lifetime learning, and a commitment to kindness, empathy, and respect. Use thoughtful language. Oftentimes, when misunderstandings and hurt are direct result from the language that is used. To start, there is no place for derogatory language. It is simply not okay to ever use racial or ethnic slurs, anti-Semitic, homophobic, sexist language, etc. Beyond eliminating this language, though individual can choose to use language that is inclusive. Learn about and eliminate the use of microaggression. A common definition of microaggression are every verbal, non-verbal, and environmental slight, snubs, or insult, whether international or uninternational, which communicate hostile, derogatory, or negative messages to target the person based solely upon their marginalized group membership. This will provide some baseline information about how microaggression work. Here is one quick example of how microaggression work. An Asian American child born and raised in the USA may be asked, "Where are you from?" and told, "Your English is really good," while the person saying these things may not be trying to hurt the child's feeling. The subtle message is that the child isn't American but must be from somewhere else. When repeated over the course of many years, this child can grow to feel isolated and different. Microaggressions are not about hurt feelings or being sensitive. They are about subtle or not so subtle ways to make a person in a marginalized group feel alienated or dismissed, and how this message perpetuated discrimination. Identify and acknowledge potential unconscious bias. A volume of research has been done around the idea of unconscious bias, or the idea that our brains make quick unconscious associations that affect our decisions, judgments, and action. Ask questions, make no assumption, and listen. At the core of all these suggestions is a simple thread. In order to participate in creating a world where we treat each other well, we must take the time to learn from each other. This means being curious about learning about those who are different from ourselves, keeping an open mind and reserving judgment, and practicing the skill of deep listening. If a goal is to make each other feel valued and equal, it may mean that we spend time examining our own vulnerabilities and working to understand other perspectives. Number 6, practice perspective talking. Imagining yourself having the same experience as another person, using your own similar past experience to understand another situation, applying general knowledge. Example is stereotypes about how people are likely to react in a particular situation. And last is increased knowledge, skills, and confidence. Helping others has a profound effect on your brain. Chemistry promotes joy and realigns you with a sense of purpose, even the face of pain. Contributing to the greater good can build self-esteem and create a positive relationship with yourself. That's all.
All right, now we will talk about the political psychology in the Philippines, under of which the political culture and psychology of corruption. Hi, I'm Mina Cruzada, and before we talked about the political psychology, next slide, Robs. Okay, before we talk about the political psychology in the Philippines, we should at least have a brief discussion about what is political psychology in general. So, agad-agad, what is political psychology? In its most basic sense, political psychology represents the merging of two disciplines. So, sa tingin nyo, ano yun? Of course, it is the psychology and the political science. But of course, hindi naman alone tong dalawang field na to ang nag-interplay. Well, other discipline as well contributed to the literature and growth of political psychology. Okay, political psychology, it involves explaining what people do by adapting different psychological concepts and or psychological theories. So they can be used or be useful in and relevant to politics. So these psychological concepts or psychological theories will be then applied to the analysis or on the explanation of a political problem or issue. So why do you think we should study political psychology? Well, I guess for me it is because people or we are imperfect information processors. Like, admit it or not, we are struggling mightily to understand the complexities of the world we are living in. Yes, people do employ logical, but I guess these logics are often faulty. Like, when deciding how to act, mapapansin nyo na yung ibang tao, they rely on others' perception, and kapag nagdesisyon na sila, they often are unaware of the causes of their own behavior or decisions. Like, for example, nung election ng May 9, biruin mo, nanalo pa yung artista or let's say yung kandidato na napakaraming nakakabit na korupsyon sa pangalan niya na matagal ng panahon. Diba nanalo pa yung mga klaseng politikong ganun kaysa sa mga kandidato na alam mo at alam ng iba na walang bahid ng korupsyon sa pangalan niya at alam natin o alam ng nakakarami na may napatunayan na at may mapapatunayan pa. I mean, bakit ko to inuulit? Bakit ko to inuulit? Because come on, Filipinos. Come on. This is 6 years. 6 years na naman ng paghihirap. Sana nga, mali tayo. And napansin ko rin na, people do things that are seemingly contrary to their own beliefs, to their own interests, to their own values. Well, I've known some na nabigyan ng pwesto sa gobyerno. Well, alam nyo to. Isipin nyo lang kung sino gusto nyo isipin na para sa kapangyarihan, para lang tumaas sa isang bansa, kahit sariling prinsipyo, kayang kalimutan at baliwalay. Diba? Okay, going back, understanding the complexities of political psychology can explain behavior that often seem irrational. Okay, the first handbook of political psychology was published in 2003. So this handbook gathers together a distinguished group of different international scholars to shed light on such questions, such as does personality affect leadership style, or do strong emotions distort the political process and worsen or enhance political decision. So this handbook focuses at the individual levels, like the genes, our early childhood experiences, our personality, ideology, and such. And of course, at the collective level, such as the group identity, the social justice, the political violence, and the prejudice induction. So this handbook, it covers models of the mass public and political elites and addresses both domestic issues and foreign policy. So since its publication in 2003, the field of political psychology has grown significantly. And, many scholars, social psychologists, political scientists, they have turned to psychology to understand the importance of behavior in political activities. Okay, let's try to analyze this question. Next. Okay, so first we read the question. What is the question? So do we look to the behavior of leaders or their followers to understand why citizens in the 1930s and 1940s followed fascist leaders who persecuted and killed millions of people? Were the atrocities committed in Germany and Russia a function of leadership or the support of the public, or both? Okay, so Okay, so there is a dilemma why citizens during the time of World War II and the reigning of course, Adolf Hitler are in favor, or let's say they follow these leaders who are really evil at its finest. So is this kind of a leadership style by this fascist leader, or because the public approves and supported it, or is it both? So, according to established researches, so some scholars attributed this because of authoritarianism. And when we say authoritarian leader, this is a type of person who prefers a social system with a stronger ruler. And the authoritarian followers naman, it is either na brainwash sila or takot sila, or is it because suportado talaga nila yung leader na to, let's say loyalist kung tawagin. So, and the authoritarian followers, it was said that they believe in anything and everything their leaders say and do. And, we can say na they are very dependent on social reinforcement of their beliefs. Like, for example, iisipin nilang tama sila because every person they know, even the media tells them they are right. So, they'll screen out, the sources that will suggest that they are wrong. So, some scholars attributed the Holocaust squarely to authoritarian followers. And on the other hand, Milgram concluded that these Holocausts can be attributed naman sa leadership function and our nature daw to obey authority, lalo-lalo na pag sinabi nila na ikaw, kunyari, follower ka na wala kang kasalanan kahit ano pang mangyari sa taong ito, basta sundin mo lang sila, or the blame will not be put onto them. So, dahil alam mo sa sarili mo na wala ka namang kasalanan kahit may nangyari sa taong ito, so, obey ka lang ng obey. And lastly, others view this as the reaction of the authoritarian on many of social and political disagreements. And because of this non-stop disagreements, a war emerged. So, yun. So, next slide. Okay. Moving on, a complex mix of individual psychology and political context also shapes the public reactions to terrorism. So, it is stated that public support for anti-terrorism policies really depends on how a threatened government reacts. Like, ano nga ba yung perceived competence ng governments and effectiveness in combating terrorism, and as well as the persons felt vulnerable. These important points must be really considered in supporting anti-terrorism policies or not. And also, in the PowerPoint, it was explained that there is a powerful terrorists and weak government. So if there is a powerful terrorist and weak government, it will then generate fear and anxiety on the citizen, while a powerful government and weak terrorist will likely generate feelings of anger, maybe because this strong government tend to de-radicalize their constituents. Pero of course, not everyone responds to threat in the same way naman, diba? And dito na pumapasok yung individual dispositions in determining whether someone reacts to terrorism with anger or anxiety. And according to Harry and Feldman in 2011, and as well as Lambert et al. In 2010, that a society dominated by feelings of anger may support aggressive anti-terrorism action, while a society with feelings of anxiousness may oppose aggressive action that will exacerbate the risk of terrorism. So, dito, hindi ko lang siya nalagay, tinakil din yung importance of citizens' democratic responsibilities. So, how well we are equipped to handle such responsibilities. Can we always arrive at a recent judgment, or we always succumb internecine enmities and fall victim to irrational intolerance? So it is very critical for us to be democratic competent, But nowadays, I think people do not have this democratic ideology. Well, because of cognitive and emotional biases. Like, for example, partisan resist to information, to new information. Yung mga yung mga loyalist kung tawagin, And if their behavior continues, sino ba ang higit na makikinabang dito? Yung mga partisan ba? Of course. Yung mga political leaders na sinusuportahan nila, yung mga political leaders na let's say may selfish interests. And do note, if isa ka sa mga taong yon na sumusuporta sa mga ganong klaseng politiko, na kahit alam mong mali na yung pinanghahawakan mong impormasyon, and you continue to support, that kind of politician, well, for me, it really impairs your ability to deliberate rationally. And for me, your democratic competence is too low. Yeah. Pero sa tingin ko naman, sa klase natin walang ganon na sumusuporta sa mga ganong klaseng politician. So let's always remember that when we are electing someone or voting for someone, we should really inhibit those cognitive psychological biases, because it really threatens not just the country but the humanity. So people, we should be open to change, a change for what is more right, and not for what is much worse. Okay, let's tackle the intellectual underpinnings of political psychology. According to Sears et al. In 2003, that there is no political psychology, but instead researchers have employed a number of different psychological theories just to study the political behavior and attitudes. Moreover, in contemporary political psychology, the Freudian psychodynamics, or those psychodynamic theories, is applied to analyze and explain the psychology of political leaders, and discourse theory, or how these human expressions contributes to political theories, or yung mga political debates, as well as in-analyze then how these expressions are communicated. And to deepen much more insight into the intellectual underpinnings of political psychology, let's have a brief discussion about the major classes of psychological theories that has been applied to the study of political behavior. Let's have first the rational choice theory. Okay, first is the rational choice theory. In its most basic sense, this theory only tells us that humans are rational actors. We make choices that we think are best by calculating the costs and benefits associated with our decisions. And rational choice theory now has been a major influence on political science models on both political elites and mass political behavior. So this theory is built on a set of basic assumptions about human behavior that is similar to the requirements or of a well-functioning citizenry. Well, just to summarize the assumptions, sabi ko nga, rational choice is choosing the course of action that maximizes one's expected utility. And if these utilities or goals are equated with our economic self-interest, then the rational choice tells us that an individual will likely be most motivated to act in ways that are most likely will benefit them solely. So in politics, this translates into support of candidates and policies that will likely improve voters' economic bottom line and that will benefit them personally. But Down in 1957, he was the first one to identify the paradox of voting. And we say voting paradox, it is when the result of a vote is contradictory, opposite of the expected outcomes. So there are many types of voting paradox. We have the popular voting, the plurality voting, and many other types of paradox voting. It only tells us that, decision of people to cast a vote is led not only by humans' pure rationality. Since Down points out the problem with rational choice theory, it has become increasingly clear that neither leaders nor citizens make entirely rational political decisions. And because of that, many scholars slowly moved away from a rational model of human behavior, and they began to study the systematic biases in human decision making. So in conclusion, it is difficult to overstate the importance of rational choice theory as a foundational basis for political psychology research. But in the handbook, it was stated that the rational choice theory continues to serve as the baseline for many political psychology research. Okay, next is the biopolitics. Okay, biopolitics naman emerged when social scientists began to view the human behavior through the prism of biology, especially how one processes information and emotions. So our biological adaptive role uh, comes to our various social behaviors, our inherited genes that can explain our many social and political behavior. So scholars began to adapt this perspective since human behavior is grounded in evolutionary thinking, of course, the natural selection. And according to Wilson in 2008, they have discussed that they okay. They have discussed that wait lang ha. That whereas classic rational choice theory is focused on individual goal seeking and reward, evolutionary psychology grapples naman increasingly with the benefits to the collective linked to the controversial theory of group selection. Biopolitics, it highlights the importance of evolutionary psychology because it deals with marked individual variation in human behavior. So we have questions like, yeah, next slide, Robs. Okay, we have evolutionary psychology questions like, why are some people open to experience and others are closed? Second, why some are conscientious and others are not? And according to Funk, it is because of genetic tendencies that explain individual differences. She said that the different, you know, facets of political behavior can be accounted because of our genes and how these genes influence our political behavior, including our political ideology, our partisan identity, our political participation, and such. She also noted the importance of biological processes in studying political behavior. Now, in biopolitics, in-group and out-group were also discussed. In-group, it is to which a person psychologically identifies as being a member of the group, and out-group naman, it refers to the groups with which individuals do not identify themselves. Hadi noted the biological evidence in support of the primary in-group attachment and how this attachment contributes, to one political behavior. So next is the personality and psychodynamics. Many of the political psychologists have also examined, the individual personality to explain the behavior of political leaders and the ideological choices of the citizens. But first, let's remember the definition of personality. And when we say personality, it is the collection of relatively persistent individual differences that transcend specific situations and contribute, to the observed stability of attitudes and behavior. During the last decades, political psychologists really shown their interest in studying these stable personality traits and its effect on political attitudes and behavior. Many psychologists work on explaining personality using the Big Five framework or the Ocean personality. Sige nga, ano yung Ocean personality, guys? Sige, ako na lang. Okay, the openness, the change, the conscientiousness, the agreeableness, the extroversion, and lastly is the neuroticism. And many of the research about political psychology really relies heavily in this theory, but then, different scholars suggests that personality is much more broader than just traits, and that we should have a similarly broad view about personality when we are drawing conclusions about individual differences in elite behavior and decision making. Well, Sigmund Freud, hindi yan mawawala sa kahit anumang discussion because Sigmund Freud really had a great deal of influence in early political psychologists because of his psychoanalytic theory, which explained which explains in terms of unconscious psychological processes like our wishes, fears, and such, of which are all we are unaware, and believes that childhood events are fundamental in creating an adult's personality. So because of this intriguing theory, many political psychologists began to analyze personalities of individuals in terms of the unconscious behavior that motivated their political behavior. So naging matunog talaga yung paggamit ng psychoanalytic approach in studying political behavior of politicians and citizens. But of course, there is always a limitation to everything. For Feldman, political ideology or the set of principles that we have is not a proxy for personality, but we should as well consider the structure of the politics. But nevertheless, personality is said to be an important addition to the study of political psychology, but might as well we shouldn't focus only at this area when studying political behaviors and such, as per the different political scientists and as well as social psychologists. So next theory is the cognitive and affective psychology. So let's have Mary Angela see the best.
Now, for cognitive and affective psychology, political psychology was influenced mainly of cognitive psychology and neuroscience with their discovery of limited attention, working memory, implicit attitude that lies outside conscious awareness, rapid formation of habitual mental association, and the interplay of affect and cognition. So fast and efficient decision-making can be overridden by individuals under appropriate condition, but political decision-making is biased with habitual thought and consistency of acquiring new information. So in politics, reliance on this form of reasoning can lead to biased and suboptimal political decisions as motivated reasoning in which disagreeable or challenging information is quickly rejected. Next, for cognitive economy. So cognitive economy are cognitive heuristics and are the economy of what's in people's mind. It is characterized by its use of distinctive expectation, hypothetical choices, cognitive ability, and express attitude. So there is a need for cognitive efficiency and awareness for politics for citizens. This leads to a focus within political psychology information. This is for us to know the citizens' depth of knowledge, how they get political information, and the sources in which they acquire it. So Hackfeld, Mondak, and the colleagues discussed the importance and the influence of speaking to those that are politically expert, even if their arguments are not held in high regard. So this provides an example of how citizens can acquire knowledge by obtaining political information within their immediate social circles. Diba gano'n naman talaga? Parang kahit na meron tayong sariling way to acquire information, usually naaapektuhan pa rin tayo ng peer groups natin, ganun, yung mga lagi natin kasama, mga lagi natin nakikita. So that's cognitive economy. Next, for implicit attitudes and automaticity. So implicit attitudes are affective in nature, fast to take effect, and as interacting with implicit attitudes in various ways. So cognitive activity is limited to commodities. Decisions are often made and opinions influenced by information that lies outside our conscious awareness kasi our brain uses conscious thoughts for important higher level activities. So political psychologists regard political decisions as high level activity, pero yung political attitudes natin pwedeng ma-impluwensyahan ng information na wala sa consciousness natin. So they are the pre-conscious attitude activation. Valentino and Nardis discussed pre-conscious attitudes on political communication in which they assessed the power of campaign ads, news media content, and other media coverage to sway the public. So alam naman natin how powerful mass media is when it comes to spreading information, kahit nga fake news eh. So for automaticity, this shares an intellectual link with behaviorist theories. So one version of behaviorist theories emphasizes the learning of long-lasting habits in which in turn guide later behaviors which they were inspired by classical conditioning. So Sears and Brown assumed that children learn basic political attitudes. So for example, racial prejudice from their families and friends, and that these early attitudes affect their later political attitudes in adulthood, such as their voting preference. So this triggers automatic association na wala ulit sa conscious scrutiny. So next, for spreading activation, this is a process that computes activation values over a set of chunks. So Heb in 1994 developed the process of automaticity that was linked into axiomatic notion. So sabi niya, where the neurons that fire together wire together. So when two objects are simultaneously associated, they will be habitually recalled and primed in the process of spreading activation. So for example, yung salitang liberal, if it's frequently associated with loose living, pot smoking, intellectual or impractical dreamers, poverty, unemployment, and drug-related crimes, the term will be connected mentally. So another example, if I say political dynasty, what words or names ang naisip nyo sa current na nakaupo sa ating government? O kayo na lang sumagot. So for habitual association naman, these are the consistent thought patterns linked together. So this is the same with spreading activation, but these are the result of those thoughts that were constantly linked. In general, this association anchor political positions that contribute to political stability over time. So kasama nito ang basic values. Naturo sa kanya nung bata pa siya na ang pagnanakaw ay masama constantly. So kapag yung bata na yun naging politician, yung attitude na na-build niya nung childhood, madadala niya rin. Hindi siya magnanakaw. So they'll be transparent with what they do plus the receipts. So next, for interplay of affect and cognition. Yeah, so cognitive biases are usually influenced by emotions. So research on affect and cognition has increased exponentially in the social sciences. So Stein discussed how political elites respond to perceived external threats. She also investigated the consequences of fear, humiliation, and anger for elite decision-making. Kasi nga sometimes when we're humiliated, scared, or angry, it distorts our views and thoughts. And this can also happen to our political elites. Sabi nga ni Chong, the beliefs of the best informed may reflect an ideology distorted perspective rather than the objective state of the world. Ayan, kagaya din nung nakasulat dyan sa slide. If those with the information needed to make a fully informed decision are also the most biased in their reasoning, rational deliberation seems like an unattainable political idea. Next, for intergroup relations. So aside from biology and emotion, political psychology also tackles collective behavior and theories of intergroup relation as an explanation of political behavior. So intergroup relation focusing on in-group identity, collective action, group prejudice, and intractable group conflict. So this also includes conflict management, interpersonal social influence, small group deliberation, immigration and multiculturalism, and discrimination. So intergroup research is increasingly international in focus. So that draws frameworks such as social identity theory. So it is also built on affect and cognition. So with affect as an important factor in motive, collective action and driving responses to societal and personal threat. So Sidenius and Kirksban stated that the power of collectives within human evolution is a basic and functional aspect of human society. So tayo, as a collective culture, most of our acquired information is influenced by our peer groups, especially when it comes to politics. Parang echo chamber ba? Ganun. So next slide. Wala bang? Ayan. So researches on racial prejudice and intergroup relation concluded a mix of cognitive and affective factors that account political group conflicts, cohesion, and conformity. Group identities are then linked to powerful emotions that generate anger and hatred and play a central role in accounts of international and domestic politics. So next is in political life of collective, threat plays a special role as it can galvanize and unify an in-group while leading vilification of an out-group. So the concept of threat has long dominated research on conflict within international relations. So example nito sa nangyayari sa bansa ay yung sa West Philippine Sea. So atin yun bakit bang iisapan natin kailangan mahirapan, di ba? So eto, may question dyan. Are we now a more humane and cooperative world? So sa tingin nyo? So this claim would undoubtedly be distributed by scholars of indigenous oppression, economic inequalities, and other societal ills. However, researchers on values and social justices open political psychology to a positive forces of cooperation, tolerance, and respect on which modern democratic societies pivot. So lastly, for the organization of this volume, of this volume, we have discussed psychological processes such as personality, early childhood and development, rational choice, decision making, the study of emotion, evolutionary politics, genetic and political rhetoric, and political ideologies such as elite behavior, international relations, and the area of domestic politics. But the whole point is that political psychology is the application of psychology to politics. But the application must be two-way between both disciplines, as the study of political psychology provides insight into basic psychology and vice versa. Now we'll go to political culture. Political culture is a set of shared views and normative judgment held by population regarding its political system. So hindi siya nagre-refer towards the attitude ng president or the prime minister, but this refer to how people view the political system as a whole and their beliefs in its legitimacy. So ang building blocks ng isang political culture ay ang beliefs, opinions, and emotions ng citizen toward the form of government. So sabi din, political culture is structure embedded. Social structures from the society directly influence political mentalities, practices, and material symbols, where social structure refers to permanent arrangement of power and wealth as resources stayed in concentrated hands of the elite while the majority remains marginalized. So there is a clear distinction between the political culture of those that hold power and the marginalized majority, which is still relevant to our society. Kasi kapag hindi tayo direktang naapektuhan, minsan hindi natin pinapakailaman, di ba? That's what privileges do. Paano naman yung wala? That's why magkaiba ang political culture ng privilege at hindi. So not unless na lang namulot na tayo at hindi na muling pipikit. So next, for Filipino political culture, politics is where the production, allocation, and the use of decision-making powers to the individual. So culture is anything that is socially created. Filipino political culture is a set of related mental and concrete constructions. So it includes beliefs, feelings, group-accepted practices, languages, paraphernalia shared by a large group of Filipinos as they produce, allocate, and use political powers within, outside, and interaction within the state. Philippines' political cultures and orientation spread in specific context conditions of historical time, pre-group association, and social structure. So Montiel, in 2012, adds that historical condition and progressive technologies of information interact with shared beliefs and political practices. So ang example na lang ito ay yung onset ng digital age noong 2001 and how individuals that joined the EDSA-DOS mobilization used email and cell phone texting as communication, while the 1986 EDSA depended on telephone brigades, printed manifestos, and videotapes. So another thing that influences political orientation is peer groups, especially with a collectivist culture like the Philippines. Studies prove that the collectivist culture emphasizes groups as a unit of social perception. So they are the ones that alter themselves in favor of the situation rather than alter the situation in favor of the self. So totoo naman to usually. The country's collectivist culture provides a stable ground for traditional political influence based on patronage o pagtangkilik. So kinship. Dito pumapasok ang political dynasty, yung mga tipong family outing sa Senado, ganun. There are studies that show that kinship politics is a threat to democracy. Kasi meron ding classical political principle na blood is thicker than water. So it asserts that power should be distributed among family members. So meron tayong mga ganyang government official eh. Hindi ko na nasasabihin, pero alam nyo na yan. Lastly, personal leadership styles. Now, for political psychology in the Philippines, an update. Next slide. Yan, so colorful political-historical changes influence Philippines political psychology. Researchers from the early 60s to 1980s shows the relationship between psychological processes and political situations. So this will be discussed further in our group. Political psychology examines the psychological processes and behaviors of individuals and groups engaged in power situations. which acknowledges the bidirectional relation between psychological and political phenomenon. So political situations are simply a cause and effect of psychological processes. So it also describes the effects of psychological processes on political environment and the influence of a particular political context on thoughts, feelings, and behaviors of its members. So for example, para maintindihan natin yung trauma that the martial law brought, we have to assess the Marcosian dictatorship, and likewise how politically traumatized social influence shaped the anti-Marcos movement na nagled sa People's Power Revolution noong 1986. Next, for political aspect of political psychology. Next slide. Yan. Political psychology is multidisciplinary as it came from psychology's micro-individualistic viewpoint to political science macro-state level processes. So political psychology, the Journal of International Society of Political Psychology involves the contribution of other disciplines such as cultural and psychological anthropology, cognitive psychology, clinical psychology, economics, history, international relations, philosophy, political science, political theory, personality, social psychology, and sociology. So there are also major areas of interest that are listed in the slide. Next, for research methods of political psychology. So there are a variety of research methods that is used by political psychologists such as systematic quantitative data to qualitative research. So in the countries, surveys such as Social Weather Station and Pulse Asia used quantitative approaches to analyze nationwide political opinion. So these methods are used to study Philippine political psychology, the use of content analysis to analyze pastoral letters after EDSA, personal experience methods to explain one's own therapy for political trauma, film and visual analysis for diagnosing endgame bargaining during failed coup attempts, and case studies developed around in-depth interviews. Next, for the first version of political psychology in the Philippines. So this focus on psychological processes and behaviors related to local politics. So there are 5 predominant political conditions with each corresponding focus of study. So we'll discuss one of those. For the first one, pre-martial rule before 1970. So ang research topic dito ay kinship system and political power. So kinship and political, Hollister and Lande concluded that kinship ties political party alliances at small town level, and this builds a vertical patron and client relationship. So within a social hierarchy, yung politician na nagkokontrol ng local resources ang nagbibigay ng emergency money at trabaho sa mga allies. So in return, the locals will guarantee the politician's vote and loyalty during election time. So ito very prominent pa rin, especially sa locals. Kasi dito sa amin noong recent election, lantaran talaga ang kinship attitude. Parang vote buying. Minsan nga pwede ka pang mag-request kung anong gusto mo sa politician eh. So next is early martial rule. So 1970 to 1975. Ang research topic naman dito ay socialization, attitudes towards abstract political concepts. So political socialization. So after the martial law proclaimed, social scientists investigated at how the authoritarian government policies influence the Filipinos' political orientation. So after a number of countries' empirical investigation during the martial law following the first quarter storm, they found out that it was the school teachers that provided Filipinos with the most information. Within the school, the second most political socialization was the peer group. So, but the Filipino family played a vital role in political socialization. Kasi at this time, adolescents saw the Filipino family structure as authoritarian, but they did not see themselves carrying the same style, but instead transitioned the family's decision-making to a more democratic system. Next is middle and late martial rule in 1976 to 1985, political conflicts and its effects. Yeah, so ang research topic ay political psychology of social conflicts. So researches during this time reflect social psychological processes of a society undergoing extreme duress. So social scientists studied stress at personal and societal level. At individual level, it was focused on stress, coping and therapy for torture victims, political detainees and their children. So the studies showed that the children of political detainees faced psychological problems. They were impoverished and malnourished. They lived in a constant stress and fearful of losing their parents. Children tend to be withdrawn, depressed, and irritable. Though their relationship with their parents remain ambivalent and cynical, yet overclinging. Resources to cope came from democratic lifestyle, emotional support from their extended families, and therapeutic plays with peers in the detention camp. So recommend ko lang dito to watch Liway. It is about a political detainee story told through their child Kip or captured. It is actually written and directed by the Kip himself to retell the story of his parents. So doon yung makikita yung buhay ng mga nakakulong noong panahon ng martial law. So you can watch it for free on YouTube. Therapeutic sessions and interviews showed how detainees and tortured victims differ to other psychological clients. So this showed that the detainees and torture victims are capable of intense social commitments. With their experience underground, they have developed their own ways to deal with stress. So there are also researches about social movements and social change. So during this time, kasi Filipino labor sector and the urban poor perceived that they were alienated from the predominant power structure. Na-realize nila that their voices together ay makakapag-generate ng social power para magkaroon ng political change. So, pero yung mga middle and upper class of the society, sumali lang sila sa movement after the assassination of Benigno Aquino. Next, for People's Power Revolution of 1986 and transition from dictatorship to democracy. So, political psychology of democratic transition. There are researchers after the People's Power Revolution had to do with the political psychological phenomena of political power, political leadership, democratic authoritarian value systems. So Lagmay also identifies 3 aspects of Filipino culture that were activated during the People's Power Revolution. So ang una, fiesta, or the people's tendency to celebrate. Second is Filipinos' ability to improvise during problematic circumstances. Third is Filipinos' Catholic religiosity. So they used the statues of Virgin Mary to watch over an unarmed crowd, mga religious leaders that faced attacks, and the large-scale crowd that were singing prayerful chants during the critical moments of the revolution. Wait, next slide. Ayan. From a social psychological perspective, a psychological change from helpless individuals to a self-confident empowered group happened during the People's Power Revolution. So one is motivated to join a powerless group kasi they have the strength in numbers that compensate for individual political inequalities. So one research also investigated the construct of non-traditional political leadership during the Aquino administration. So the finding showed that a non-traditional leader ay galing sa middle class na pamilya. A nationalist with a democratic political style had leftist political views, tumutupad sa pangako, constant with their political views, was not supported by business sectors or the oligarchs. Para sa masa, hindi nagsisinungaling at mandaraya, was not anti-communist and was not sexist. So, ito, very relevant na rin sa ating political attitude. Marcos strengthened the power of military to rule in the political elites and ruled over local decision-making. So, dito naman marirecommend din nyo ang Escapo. So, also on YouTube, a martial law film about Serge Osmeña Jr. and Henny Lopez na makikita nyo doon kung na yung ibang militar nagrulo sila over political positions. So sa Liway makikita nyo rin yan. Lastly, post-People's Power Revolution to present or the nationwide public opinion survey. So public opinion survey. So post-Marcos era, people are conducive to political surveys because of 2 reasons. Number 1, citizens were free of fears of political reprisal that was rampant during the authoritarian regime, and then they gave out spontaneous response. Second, public officials were more sensitive to civilian pulse. So during the first 5 years after the martial law, data from the nationwide pulse summarized the Filipinos' attitude towards social issues. So social weather station polls resulted on how Filipinos felt toward the US bases, foreign debt problem, government performance in 1987 and 1998, and the democracy. Ateneo de Manila University nationwide polls, also known as the People's Pulse, covered Filipinos' attitudes to land reform, legislature, President Corazon Aquino, and the military institutions. Thank you.
Whew. Okay, I am back. And now that we know the political culture here in our country, let's get to know naman the psychology of corruption. So again, before tackling the psychology behind corruption, let us first have a brief discussion about what is corruption, different types, causes, consequences, and cures of corruption. Let us begin. Okay, so corruption in its most basic explanation, this is any act of wrongdoing by a person who is entrusted with authority which result in the abuse of that authority and a betrayal of the good or interests of others. Okay, Rob's next slide. So corruption is also the use of unethical methods to get some advantage of others or by others. So what are the common examples of corruption? So we have the bribery, the extortion, the misuse of public funds, the hiring of unqualified relatives in public positions. So what are the examples of public resources or properties na usually kinokorrupt ng mga klaseng politician na to? So we have the money, the goods, the vehicles, the buildings, the pension funds, medical aid funds, and the like. So also, according to the Transparency International's Corruption Index or the CPI, the Philippines ranked 117th out of 180 countries for the year 2021 na most corrupt country. So we ranked 117th for the year 2021. So now we will talk about the state of corruption here in the country. So based on different studies na din, it has been well studied that types of corruption in the Philippines can be found at all levels, ranging from political or grand corruption, petty, bureaucratic, administrative corruption, patronage, and state capture are all present with varying degrees. Okay, let's talk about the political or grand corruption. Hindi naman lingid sa ating kaalaman that political system here in the country is regularly plagued by corruption scandals that involved politicians at all levels, from the president to the members of opposition parties. So abuse of the political system starts with the electoral process and often continues throughout the entire tenure of the politician. Okay, in the recent countries at the Crossroad surveys, the Philippines scored 3.25 out of 7, with 0 being the weakest performance. So in the free and fair electoral laws and election, the global the GIISP received a very weak rating. So dahil nga 3.25 lang yung rating natin. So also, according to Miranda in 2006, election time also gives rise to possible corruption because the need for political patronage becomes intense. So while by law, we all know that all citizens are allowed to participate equally in the political process. We know that, 'di ba? May mga centers tayo ngayon na artista, ex-convict, maraming link na corruption, hindi relevant yung background, and many more na politician na meron tayo ngayon. But because of the exorbitant costs of running a particular campaign, ensures that an average citizens are not able to run for political office, no offense, and elections are often won by whoever can mobilize the highest amount of votes. personal, like no minimum, no maximum amount of donations. So I don't know if you heard this, but personal donations, and take note, this is per donor. Per donor pa yun, ha. So the high cost of elections serves to create dependencies on rich campaign contributors, reinforces the power of status quo that encourage corruption by politicians once they are in the office. So akala natin just because we use machines, voting machines nowadays, walang nangyayaring electoral fraud and corruption. Believe it or not, paniwalaan man natin or hindi, even not seen on the mainstream, may nangyayari pa rin magic dyan sa pagbibilang or canvas ng mga votes. So, ano nga ba yung most notable election scandal? Of course, it was when President Arroyo, who sought assistance from an election commissioner to ensure a 1 million vote margin in 2004 presidential race. So, napatunayan naman at nagsorry naman siya sa pamilya ni dating niyang kalaban na ex-actor, FPJ, who's supposed to be the real president in the year 2004. Vote buying is also rampant, during electoral campaigns. Kahit nga may evidence na binaliwala pa rin ng COMELEC. De, joke lang. Bakit? Dahil people nowadays are greedy for power. And that's really the sad and the truth part. We all know that the Philippines has a long history of corruption in government. Meron dyang embezzlement of public funds, grafts, abuse of official power by elected officials. This is a common place. We know it. The pork barrel. Alam naman natin sino ang mga na-involved doon. We have Revilla Estrada nakulong pero na-re-elect bilang senators, while Estrada won, right, in the 2022 national elections. So in addition, according to household survey, this is a large scale household survey which assesses general public attitudes towards and experience with corruption. And according to them, political parties are perceived to be one of the most corrupt institutions by the Filipino people. Well, this is according to a large household survey. So, sino ba yung mga most notable elected politicians na sobrang daming na corrupt? Ito, hulaan nyo na lang. From 1972 to 1986, this president and his family have stolen between 5 to 10 billion US dollars of worth of state assets. Attempts by the subsequent government to recover these assets gave rise to one of the largest and longest running assets recovery cases in the world, with only chunks of millions recovered so far. Tapos the president will be another Marcos. So why? What's the real motive, diba? To get away that easily? Who else? Of course, we have the ex-president Estrada, who stole more than 4 billion pesos of state funds, but fortunately nakulong at napatalsik naman siya sa pwesto. Okay, that's for the political grand corruption. So we have the patronage and state capture. And moving on, political patronage is the appointment or hiring of a person to a government post on the basis of partisan loyalty. So elected officials at the national, state, and local levels of government use such appointments to reward the people who help them win and maintain their position on the office. So this practice led to the saying, to the victor, go to the spoils, meaning the winner is entitled to all of the rewards or benefits of the success kahit hindi makatarungan or hindi malinis. Okay. State capture, on the other hand, occurs when the ruling elite or the powerful businessmen manipulate policy formation and influence the emerging rules of the game, including laws and, and economic regulations to their own advantages. And in the Philippines, the dispensing of patronage over the delivery of good governments really limits, the ability of voters to demand accountability from these elected officials. And aside from patronage, we have the cronyism. I guess the perfect word for this is favoritism. So dahil kaibigan o kapamilya mo sila, bibigyan mo sila ng pwesto kahit wala naman silang alam or kahit konting background about politics. Nakakagalit, 'di ba? Nakakagalit talaga. In the Philippines, the National Integrity Survey found that systematic capture of the government by seemingly a lack of financial independence from sponsors can pave the way for capture of the states. This is according to the NISP. Okay. This is because of the special interests. So, since campaign contributors often demand a quid pro quo after election. So, alam naman natin yan. Kahit hindi natin makita sa news, alam natin may nangyayaring demands na ganyan. So, third is the petty, administrative, or the bureaucratic corruption. Next, okay. Okay, this type of corruption is similar to the first or to the grand corruption. So administrative corruption includes persons like the higher authorities, the officers, the police officers and such. So usually it includes the use of bribery and favoritism to allow certain individuals or businesses to lower their taxes, escape regulations, or win low-level procurement contracts. In the Philippines, in the 2011 Global Corruption Barometer, it has found that this country, or the Philippines, is among the country that is most affected by bribery, with 32% people surveyed claiming to have paid bribes to access different public services. Public services such as the healthcare, education, license, and the like. So, private companies naman, they find, petty corruption to be one of the biggest obstacles during business or in doing business in the Philippines. And according to the SWS 2008 survey of enterprises and corruption, 7 out of 10 companies were asked for a bribe in administrative transactions. So, petty corruption is common, for example, when bidding contracts. Who are the sectors naman or institution that are most prone to corruption? So, next slide. So, these are also based on the survey perceived by the Filipinos. So, this is only perceived by the Filipinos. And this is, according to the general population of the Philippines, this is some of the most corrupt. They perceive to be the most corrupt. We have the political parties, civil servants, and parliament or the legislator. We have also the judiciary sector. We have also the private sector, and as well as the media. And fortunately, there is unavailable data on a direct experience of corruption naman with regard to key public services and institution. So we have the police, we have the land services and registry permit services. We have also the education, the health, and of course the tax revenue. So I guess that's it for the sectors. Okay, what are the causes of corruption? So for this, according to various researches, here are the most common causes of corruption and why it is still prevalent. So it is because of the lack of effective leadership. I guess this is because of the head of the state. The lack of public support. So this is more of on the citizen. The lack of proper system, this is more on the government. Donation as well. Donation in the educational institution can be the cause of corruption, the lack of autonomy, and of course, the lack of effective management. So, what are the consequences of corruption if this continues? So, for this, according, if corrupt officials, continue this selfish act, stealing public funds, kaban ng bayan, of course, it will result on the loss of our national wealth. And those corrupt officials, alam natin that they will never care kahit mawala pa or kahit mawala sa atin ng mga ito dahil makasarili sila, dahil they are greed. So, ganid sila talaga. And if patuloy pa rin nasa maling kamay ang kapangyarihan or the authority, sooner or later, lahat tayo maghihirap. And because of poverty, expected na mas lalong tataas yung terrorism, especially heinous crimes. Of course, tataas to para makasurvive ang mga tao araw-araw. And if people are subjected na baka isang araw, sila na yung mabiktima ng mga of different crimes, what will be the result? Of course, having a psychological and or social disorders. So, that's only the many of the consequences of corruption. So, hindi pa na-state dito lahat, but that is the common consequences of corruption. And for the cures of corruption, so for the cure of corruption, basically, of course, the public interest, dapat maging interesado tayo. Demand for accountability, sa lahat ng hahawak or lahat ng nasa gobyerno, honest bureaucrats, so dapat mag-elect tayo or ng mga honest and walang bahay ng anong korupsyon na mga politiko, honest media as well, the autonomous investigating agencies, the effective and regular vigilance, and of course, transparency in the system. We should always demand for transparency para alam natin kung saan nga ba napupunta yung ating national wealth. So, madaling basahin, pero I swear na mahirap itong gawin. So, what we should do is, magsimula yung pagbabago. So, wait lang. So, dapat magsimula yung pagbabago in continuing to educate the misinformed people and continue to fight for what is right. Okay? And not to fight for what is wrong. Okay. Now, we will talk about the basic motivation of the corrupt. And according to psychology, the basic motivation of the corrupt is their past experiences, their personality, and how these two affect their thinking level. It is when a person is, It is when a person is born with a certain personality or during his or her upbringing, they have certain past experiences such as poverty, and these experiences can have an influence on their personality. So the combination of past experiences and personality, as I have said, results in a certain thinking pattern, which results in a corrupt behavior. So let's talk about first the past experiences. So, if a person daw has low socioeconomic upbringing or the friends, the neighbor, society live in poverty, may tendency daw na maging corrupt siya pag lumaki na yung isang taong yon. Second is the selfish upbringing. So, the parents, friends, neighbors, or society do not spend money easily. So, dahil they do not spend money easily, pwede daw tendency na maging corrupt yung isang batang to para makaspend ng walang limit or walang limit yung pag-i-spend niya ng pera. So, being with greedy crowd. So, if the parents, friends, neighbors, society is obsessed with getting more and more money, either to store money in banks or to show others they are wealthy, ang tendency ay, malaki daw yung tendency na maging corrupt yung batang yon. in the future. So, nandito rin yung poor leadership, especially by mentors, senior people. So, wala sa kanilang parang nagle-lecture na it is not good, to be obsessed with money para lang ipakita na mayaman ka or something like that. The violent upbringing. So, if the parents, friends, neighbors, society is obsessed with getting more and more money by violent, means parang wala silang pakialam, even if the person has suffered violence, abuses by others, basta makakuha lang sila ng pera. So, if that person has violent upbringing, it also have the tendency to be corrupt in the future. So, we have next the attitude, personality, or born with or influenced during the upbringing. So, next slide, Robs. Okay. And if a person that has inferiority complex, meaning meron siyang a feeling of low respect toward himself or feels that people are not paying him enough respect. So, yung mga taong may inferiority complex, they believe that money will bring respect. So, kapag may pera ako, rerespetuhin nila ako at gagalangin nila ako at kakaibiganin nila ako. So, they have a thinking like that. So, risk-taking behavior naman, nandito rin yung do or die attitude. So, live life to the fullest. Like, one craves from adrenaline high, believes in no risk, no reward. So, dito usually yung mga nag-i-invest. Yung mga nag-i-invest na hindi muna talaga nagkakaroon ng extensive research kung legit ba to or hindi. So, ang tendency dahil gusto nila ng mabilisan, mag-risk in everything, so they have the tendency to fall on the scam. So, payo ko lang na huwag kayo basta-basta mag-i-invest, lalo na kung hindi naman katiwa-tiwala yung pag-i-invest nyo. Okay? We have also greed. Of course, greed at all costs. Okay? And pangina ba to? 1, 2, 3. And fourth is if the person has superiority complex, one believes that he is the most, or he or she is the most intelligent person born to be great, and so he deserves the money that he gets by any means. There's also a belief that they will not be caught, and even if they got caught, iniisip nila, may thinking sila na the punishment will be light. Kasi sila nga yung pinakamatalino at pinakamagaling na tao sa buong mundo. So, ganyan mag-isip yung taong may superiority complex. So, revenge naman, people with this attitude believes that it is the fault of others that one or he or she is not performing to his full potential. And dahil doon, nagre-revenge sila. So, revenge, by what means? It is in getting more and more money. Okay? Okay, and then we'll talk about the thinking. Paano ba sila mag-isip? So, yes, Robs. Next slide. So, let's try to have statements on this one na lang, paano na mag-isip yung isang tao. For inferiority complex, siguro we can give an example like, I have to get the money anyhow so that people will praise me and respect me. And for the risk-taking behavior, it does, ang pwedeng statement dito is, it does not matter how I get the money as long as I win in every circumstances. In greed naman, it doesn't matter how I get my money or how other people are affected as long as I become rich, become wealthy. For the superiority complex, I'm the most intelligent person, born to be great, so I deserve the money that I get by any means. And I don't care if I got caught, because if I got caught, I know and I believe that the punishment will be light. And lastly, for the revenge, I will show other people that I am better than them by getting more and more money and by surpassing them with my wealthiness. So, para sa akin, ganun mag-isip yung may mga attitudes or personality na to. So, next is the levels of corruption. So we have the high level and low level of corruption. So for the high level of corruption, the people at higher positions in the hierarchy indulge in corruption because of two reasons. We have because they get some part of the corrupt money of low level employees, and of course if they have the tolerant attitude towards corruption, it helps to maintain the loyalty among employees. So when we say tolerant attitude, or if you describe someone that is tolerant, you approve of the fact that they allow other people to say and do what they like, even if they do not agree with or like the person who is doing that behavior. So tolerant meaning okay sa'yo lahat kahit sarili mo hindi ka okay, because you want to maintain that loyalty among employees. And now we have the low level corruption. Okay, people at low levels of hierarchy indulge in corruption because of the following reasons: because they earn less, of course, mababa yung sweldo nila, and the high levels of hierarchy get some part of the corrupt money, and dahil doon pinapayagan silang mag-corrupt, and they have this so-called permission to be corrupt so that the government can pay them less income. So yeah, that is the low levels of corruption. And now for the last slide of the psychology of corruption is the vicious cycle of corruption. So paano nga ba itong activity, experiences, peer support, and activity? Okay. First thing is that the person indulged in corruption activity. After committing such activity, he gets a positive experience. Then what will he do is to tell about his experiences to his peers, mentors, and get positive feedbacks and even support from them na ipagpatuloy mo lang tong klaseng action na to. So because of this peer support, he indulges in more corruption activity. So we can assume that he can utilize this money to earn more money pa by getting more people willing to work for him and indulge in more corruption activity. And finally, people dahil sa hirap ng buhay or dahil ganid sila nature, they will eventually follow this route or cycle of corruption. Kasi dito madali lahat eh. Kaya hanggat may sumusuporta, magpapatuloy to. So I'm leaving you with this quote of Coronel in 1998 that corruption in government is not just an individual act, but a social act. And I guess that's the end of the psychology of corruption or the political psychology in the Philippines. And for us to know the Filipino electoral behavior and its subtypes, may we have Catherine Joy D. Banta to take on the presentation. Miss Kath?
Good day, Sir Mostoles, and good day, classmates. So, ngayon, ang pag-uusapan natin is research on Filipino political psychology in 1990s. So, next slide, please. So, Filipino style electoral behaviors and political attitudes. Electoral behavior research focuses on how political candidates are chosen and political parties are created. One example is the incumbent president's anointing of a successor. Before peacefully ended her tenure in 1992, President Corazon Aquino nominated Fidel V. Ramos as the ruling party's presidential candidate. So Ramos chose Jose de Venecia as his candidate in 1989, but he was defeated by Joseph Estrada. Several people ran for president in 1992 and 1998 elections. So according to Lande, 1996, this municipality of candidate reflects on absence of stable political parties. This deviated from the traditional norm of having only two prominent contenders in Philippine presidential elections. Furthermore, several parties formed coalitions. According to Tura 1995, even former political enemies became political allies, because of these mergers. Electoral patterns show a lack of focus on the platforms and issues as well as continuous emphasis on personality politics. So, dumami yung political parties at hindi na lang siya nagstay sa dalawa dahil sa pagdami rin ng mga presidential candidates. For example, may mga candidate na noon na magkakalaban sila or magkakaiba sila ng political party, but then they merge and naging magkakampi sa mga susunod pang mga elections. So, next slide please. Para sa voting behavior, ito yung mga naging basihan ng tao sa pagpili sa kanilang mga kandidato. First is, people tend to vote on basis of personality and not on issues. Ibig sabihin, mas pinipili ng tao ang kandidato na mabuti ang pinapakita kahit na ito ay may mga kaso o mga issue na nakaraan. Mas nagugustuhan ng tao ang mababait o matutulungin sa harap ng kamera o sa harap ng ibang tao kahit na pag-aralan naman ang background ng candidate ay hindi ganun kaganda ang kanyang mga nagawa. So second is voting without knowing any platform. So based nga sa pagboto ng tao sa kandidato na may maayos na personality ay kaya rin nilang iboto ang kandidato kahit na wala itong naihahain na programa o plataforma na makakapag-resolve ng mga issue ng bansa. Kumbaga okay na sa kanila na mabait sa paningin ng kandidatong napili kahit na ba ito ay walang kaplano-plano. And for the third is according to Landay 1996, a major factor was regionalism and language. Isa pa sa naging basis for selecting a candidate ay ang factor na kung bakit biniboto ng tao ang kandidato ay dahil sa regionalism and language. So for example, ay kapag ang candidate na yon ay kapareha nila ng bayan o lugar ng pinagmulan at nagkakaintindihan sila sa lengguwahe, iyon ay malaking factor or puntos na rin. Dahil dito na ipapakita ng kandidato na pinapahalagahan niya kung ano ang kanyang pinagmulan at dahil rin dito ay parang natatouch or parang na-appreciate at dahil doon ay mas binoboto sila ng mga botante. Then, fourth is, according to Landay 1996, numerous actors won the national and local levels. So dito, baka aware na tayong lahat na ang mga artista ay tumatakbo ngayon sa mga political industry. So, nagkakaroon ng malaking chance yon para iboto sila ng mga tao. Hindi lang sa local levels or hindi lang sa mayor, governor levels, pero pati na rin sa national elections. Mas mabilis silang nakikilala ng mga tao dahil sila ay artista na at hindi man sa political industry ay nakilala rin sila sa showbiz industry. Dito pumapasok na kahit walang plataforma ang isang kandidato or magaling lamang siya umarte sa telebisyon ay binoboto siya dahil sa kilala siya ng mamamayan. According to Carol, 1994, a majority of the families voted for the same candidates. So, dito pumapasok na ang pagkakaisa ng isang pamilya na iboto ang botante na kanilang napili. Kumbaga, kung ano ang desisyon ng isa, ay yun na rin ang magiging desisyon ng lahat. Then, lastly is according to Landay 1996 and Clark 1993, reach voters by help of non-government organizations and student volunteers. So dito naman ay mas nakikilala syempre ang mga kandidato kung maraming tao ang tumutulong sa kanya na ipalaganap ang mga nais niyang gawin o ipakilala siya sa mga tao. For example, ay dito na iyahain tulad ang voluntarismo na nangyari sa isa sa mga kandidato ng pagka-presidente ngayong eleksyon 2022. Siya ay nagkaroon ng napakaraming volunteers dahil na rin sa nagustuhan ang kanyang adhikain at plataforma. Dahil dito ay nauso ang house-to-house kung saan ang mga volunteer ay nagbabahay-bahay para maipakilala ang kandidato sa mga tao lalo na sa mga bayan na hindi naaabot ng media.
Hello, good afternoon. So, ang next naman is ang social influence of the church in politics. So, the political role of the church remains a topic of interest and concern. One such interest is whether religion is a factor to consider during elections. In 1992, it did not play a very powerful role. So, noong 1998 naman, it was the first time religious groups were involved in politics in such blatant way. Several church groups openly endorsed particular candidates, such as Jesus Miracle Crusade, the Jesus is Lord movement for Jose de Venecia, and Iglesia ni Cristo for Joseph Estrada. So, the El Shaddai movement naman, a group of millions of Catholics, gave its followers freedom to choose their candidate. But many believed that its leader, Mike Velarde, preferred Joseph Estrada. It was also known that the Catholic Church was against Joseph Estrada nung panahon na yan. So, sa panahon natin naman ngayon, nung kakaraan lang na election, this 2022 election, yung pinaka-head ng Iglesia ni Cristo ay openly ini-endorse na si Bongbong Marcos. And hindi ko alam kung legit yung nilabas din nila na ini-endorse din nila yung ilan sa mga senatorial candidates. So, the church, particularly the Catholic Church, actively resisted political attempts to amend the Constitution. So, before, former President Corazon Aquino demobilized Filipino First of September 21, 1997 against character change. So, yung character change or cha-cha ay isang constitutional reform. It refers to the amendments of revision in the 1987 Philippine Constitution. During the Ramos administration, it was against Joseph Estrada's proposed constitution correction for the development. So, Catholic Church in particular is said to have a role in politics is through pastoral letters. Yung pastoral letters ay yun yung mga letters na binabasa ng bishops para sabihin tuwing may parang i-address nila yung kumbaga yung mga followers. And yung mga pastoral letters, isang halimbawa nito yung parang script letter na sinasabi tuwing pagkaka-end ng misa, lalo na yung sa about COVID-19, yung dasal about COVID-19. So, ilan sa mga bishops ay sinasabi yung pag-address at tamang pagboto sa darating na 2022 election sa before. Ayun. Tapos sa Conception 1992, content analyzed pastoral letters from the Catholic Bishops' Conference of the Philippines or CBCP dealing with elections and constitution. He noted that the message first addressed the politicians themselves, then later on appealed to the Filipino people. The main message of these letters was to ending old politics. Isa din sa mga tinatalakay sa pastoral letters ay yung pag-address sa death penalty, kidnapping, peacemaking, population, and election reforms. So, the Catholic Church has actively participated in political peacemaking. The environment, both macro and micro influence the predispositions of key individuals and political actors. Macro environment factors include yung collapse of communist movement, And the factors naman ng microenvironment refer to the social organization structures of any interrelationship within the community, which were institutionalized in the zone of peace. So, beyond the three political psychological characteristics of Cantamanyog, this zone, so yung Cantamanyog, ito yung isa tong sitio or barangay sa Negros Occidental kung saan dineclare nila ito na isa sa mga zone peace kung saan unang-una dito ay isa sa mga karakteristik nito ay yung transformation of the concept of leadership. So, meron silang, sinearch ko to sa Google and meron silang parang ina-address doon na meron silang sariling way of leadership sa lugar na yon. Pero hindi ko lang siya masyado naintindihan kasi yung language na is pang sa kanila, sa pang Negros yung kanilang language doon. Yung nando sa letter. And number 2 is yung new populism. Constituent support of leaders was based not so much on party ideology but on their perceived personal credibility. And number 3, insistence of residents to have a key role in the cessation of hostilities by conducting strategic political negotiation with key political actors in insurgency. So, ang next naman po ay presidential personality. So, isang tanong dyan is, how important is the personality of a president? This is how much of a difference does it actually, that is how much of a difference that is actually make to what happens once a person is in office. So, are certain personalities more likely to succeed where others are more likely to fail? Meron akong na-search dyan. Personality doesn't predict everything, but it does predict some things. So, gaano ba ka-importante na ang personality ng isang presidente? So, bago yan, ano nga ba yung personality? Or, wait lang. So, to have a personality trait, individual must be somewhat consistent across situation in their behaviors related to traits. So, for example, if they are talkative at home or kung kung arrogante ba sila sa bahay nila or parang feeling boss ba sila sa bahay nila, sa trabaho rin kaya ay meron din silang ganong karakteristik or trait. Individual with a trait are also somewhat stable over time in behaviors related to the trait. So, wait lang. So, the debate about the relative importance of the personality traits of the president has a long history. Until the mid-1970s, scholars of the presidency extensively focused on the uniqueness of the individual that held office. So, tayo, kahit hindi tayo professional or may karapatan tayong kilatisin kung ano or sino or yung tinataglay na katangian ng isang presidente or isang kumakandidato sa pagka-presidente. Kasi unang-una, yung mga sobrang importante na kinukonsider natin kung ano sila, kung paano sila gumalaw sa bilang isang normal na tao. Kasi hindi malalayo na pwede nila itong magamit sa pagka-presidente nila. Pwede nila itong magamit kapag nakaupo na sila. Pwede nila may pakita kung sino na sila. So, tayo bilang mamamayan, kahit hindi tayo professional, dapat, kahit hindi man tayo professional, dapat kilatisin natin kung paano sila. Kasi, this include na yung description nila sa kanilang personalidad, yung leadership styles nila, and how people perceive them. And also, a large and rapidly growing body of research shows that people temperament, their characteristic motivations and goals, and their internal conceptions of themselves are powerful predictors of how they will feel, think, and do in the future, and powerful aids in explaining why. So, kayo ba, kung tatanungin ko kayo, nung nakaraang election ba, kinilatis nyo ba ng maigi kung sino yung mga dapat nyong iboto? Kasi, kung totoong kinilatis nyo, salamat. Kasi, ibig sabihin lang nun ay may pakialam kayo sa kainat na ng 6 years nating buhay. So, ako kasi bilang, ako mabibigyan na ako na example. So, dapat hindi lang ako naka-focus dun sa iisang kandidato na napupusuan ko kasi magiging bias ako nun eh. Kung siya lang yung tinitingnan ko, ito, dito, mabait siya, magaling siya, yung puso na nasa masa talaga. And then, ayun, so, tiningnan ko yun. And then, base doon, tiningnan ko din yung ibang mga kumakandidato kung paano ba sila, yung mga pas nilang pamumuno, kamusta ba, kung yung mga previous interviews nila, pinanood ko din. And makikita mo doon kung sino yung tunay na may pakialam sa talaga sa mga tao. Makikita mo doon yung isang kandidato, well-known sila sa pagkakaroon talaga ng pribilehiyo. And then, yung isang kandidato talagang, meron lang silang simpleng buhay, pero, alam mo yun, makikita mo talaga doon yung pagkakaiba nila base sa pamumuhay nila. Kasi, yung isa daw doon, hindi daw sila makakauwi ng walang private na sasakyan or eroplano. Samantalang isa doon naman, before, sanay na sila talagang bumiyahe. Bus pa yung gamit nila noon. And, ayun, dun na sa simpleng pag-observe na yon, makikita mo na doon yung makisasabi mo na doon yung personality nila or yung way of living nila. Kasi, makikita mo na yung isa, masasabi mong arrogante or, ito, no offense to ha, pero yung isa masasabi mong buhay na sa, alam mo yun, pribilehiyo, pagiging mayaman. Samantalang isa sa pamumuhay na sa simpleng buhay, kung saan nakaka-relate ang mga mamamayang Pilipino. Kung ikaw bilang isang botante, makakonsidera mo ba yung taong kahit kailan hindi nakaranas ng pamumuhay na, alam mo yun, pamumuhay na, wait. So, kung ikaw bilang isang mamamayang Pilipino, makakonsidera mo ba yung taong kahit hindi daw siya uuwi ng walang sariling sasakyan or walang private na sasakyan, sa isang taong simple lang, nakaranas maka-encounter ng traffic, ng pagpila sa mga bus liner. So, ayun pa lang, makikita mo na, di ba? So, in the realm of politics, psychologists have recently demonstrated how fundamental features of human personality, such as extroversion and narcissism. So, ito, kadalasang issue to kahit sa ibang bansa. Pero dito sa atin na-encounter na rin natin to, isang leader na may strong personality, kung saan nasasabi mong narcissistic, may tinataglay siya nito. Kung ikaw isang tao na hindi mo na-value yung mga taong nasa paligid mo, may masasabi mo bang deserving ka sa pwesto? Kasi ang narcissism nga, di ba, extreme self-involvement to the degree that it makes person ignore the needs of those around them. So, magiging isang ayos na presidente ka ba kung ini-ignore mo or bulag-bulagan ka sa mga pangangailangan ng majority, ng mga mahihirap, ng mga nasa laylayan. Well, everyone may show occasional narcissistic behavior. True narcissists frequently disregard others or their feelings. So marami akong nababasa sa internet na ito opinion lang nila na yung president na meron tayo is merong ganito daw behavior, meron daw gantong personality. Kasi din sa mga lumalabas na issue about din sa total nagtatakot tayo ng politics about din sa EJK kasi ang dami di bang mga innocenting taong nadamay doon, and hanggang ngayon wala pa siyang nilalabas na tamang pag-address about sa nangyayari sa EJK. Parang hanggang ngayon wala pa ring sagot sa mga innocenting nadamay tulad ng mga kahit estudyante, maraming namatay sa EJK katulad na lang ni Ken de los Santos. So doon pa lang makikita mo na kung meron silang selective justice, masasabi mo bang tama or meron silang pakialam sa mga tao? So dito sinasabi ko lang na sobrang importante na i-consider ang personality sa pagpili ng mga official sa ating government. So, dyan sa na-research ko din na much has been written about Corazon Aquino and the other two post-Marcos presidents, so si Fidel V. Ramos and si Joseph Estrada. This include a description of their personality, leadership styles, and how people perceive them. So, sinasabi na si Corazon Aquino, ang major accomplishment niya ay yung restoring the democratic institution kasi siya yung pumalit, di ba, after ng dictatorship ni Marcos. So, she is known for her leadership in defeating 7 coup d'etat attempts, as well the leadership ensuring general, peaceful, and honest election. So, she was criticized for being ambivalent and easy about asserting her leadership in partisan political affairs. She is also described as being intelligent, decent, honest, simple, humble, selfless, sincere, and democratic. So, si Fidel Ramos naman, ang dami nagsasabi na she is a man of vision. Kasi si Fidel Ramos, sinasabi nila na yung personality niya, once kasi na may binivision siya na plano, ganyan, inaano niya agreed yun as an action, parang ginagawa niya ito. And he is also he is also a peacemaker and a statesman. Sinasabi din dito na he is hands-on on his leadership style. Kasi wala siya masyadong parang kanang kamay, ganon. Sinasabi rin nila. So, the continuation naman ng next na po. So, the continuation naman of public opinion survey tala is this paved the way for the proliferation of public opinion polls. These surveys are often commissioned by the candidates themselves to evaluate their chances of winning. So ako ngayon ko lang nalaman na yung palang mga nilalabas na sa survey, bayad pala yon ng kandidato na gusto nilang malaman kung ano nga ba yung magiging resulta, magiging pwedeng resulta ng election. Kasi para sa akin, sobrang laki ng ng epekto nito sa mga tao or influence ng mga tao sa pag-iisip ng mga survey. Kasi ako mismo, pag may mga nagtatanong pag tinatanong ko yung mga kakilala ko kung sinong iboboto nila, sasabihin nila, ito na lang iboboto ko yung kandidato na to kasi ang lakas niya sa mga tao, kakalabas lang ng survey, ang lakas niya sa mga tao. Kumbaga parang nagiging parang nagiging lason siya sa mga tao kasi parang pwede nitong madiktahan kung ano yung magiging desisyon ng mga tao. Gaya na rin ng Pulse Asia survey na lumalabas nitong last election. Ang daming lumalabas na survey, 'di ba, na about sa magiging resulta ng election, and makikita na isang kandidato lang talaga yung halos laging nananalo. Base lang ito doon sa mga Pulse Asia, yung mga sikat na survey. Hindi ko na dito isasali yung mga university na survey kasi sa school lang yun umiikot. Pero doon kasi sa mga Pulse Asia, isa sa mga halimbawa ng public opinion survey ay yung Pulse Asia, di ba? Ngayon ko lang nalaman na bayad pala talaga siya at parang nire-request yun na ilabas ng isang nire-request na i-conduct ng isang kandidato para malaman niya kung gaano ba siya kalakas sa susunod na election. So, isa na rin dito yung social weather station or yung, for instance, was able to successfully predict the outcomes of the 1992 and 1998 elections. One issue raised in relation to this survey is whether they influenced the public vote. Sandoval noong 1998 claims that there is no such bandwagon effect based on the data that voting scores do not change as election draws closer. So, yung the SWS also regularly conducts survey. Hindi lang siya about sa election, pero yung self-related poverty, yung quality of life, and performance rating of kung nasasatisfy pa yung mga tao sa public ay sa service na binibigay ng mga government officials. So, this service reported that the fluctuation of satisfaction ratings of Aquino and Ramos and Aquino began her term with a net performance rating of 53%. Masasabi daw na na maaring legit yung survey na kinokonduct kasi yung mga responded na binibigay, mga sinasali doon is halo. Dagdag ko lang din pala doon sa presidential personality. So, siguro pa kayo, aware din naman kayo na niromantasize na ng mga tao yung porket ang isang presidente maraming nagagawa is okay lang kung paano na niya i-address yung mga tao. Ikaw ba, isang president, ikaw ba isang tao, isang mamamayan, yung isang presidente mag-a-address ng nasyon or magkakaroon yung SONA or sa press conference, i-address niya yung mga tao. Makikita mo doon na yung presidente parang ginagawa ng normal yung pagmumura sa SONA or sa press conference. Masasabi mo bang good qualities yun ng isang tao? Or hindi mo ba ma-identify kung ano yung personality na meron siya? And ang isang presidente, normal lang ba na i-objectify ang mga babae or i-sexualize kahit yung openly sexualizing yung mga katulong na meron siya sa bahay nila? 'Di ba? Sobrang laking factor na magkaroon tayo ng i-consider natin ang personality ng isang tao, hindi lang yung mga credentials o mga nagawa nila. Kasi maaaring yung anak mo pag napapanood yung mga SONA or yung mga friends conference ng isang presidente na ito, maririnig niya na nagmumura yung nagbabad finger siya sa national TV, masasabi mo bang okay lang yon? Take note na isa siyang pundasyon ng isang bansa. So, nararapat lamang na magkaroon tayo ng standard. Hindi yan jowal or lalaki or kung ano na lang na basta. Iyan ay isang presidente. So, sana gumamit tayo ng kumbaga litisin natin kung sino ba talaga yung nararapat. Ayun lang.
All right, go on. Rob's next slide. Wait lang. Wait. Robs, hindi mo ba sila naririnig?
Ako, rinig mo?
Oo. Robs, magsalita ka, sige. Ikat mo muna. Ikat mo, Robs. Ay, hindi, dalawang video na lang.
Oo,
Kunwari,
dalawang video na hiwalay na lang.
Philip, sige. Ilang minutes ba? Abot na 20 minutes yan. Bukas kaya, Yaya, hindi na lang ba hindi nagre-report dyan? Parang hindi na yata kaya ng computer ni Robs eh. O bakit ata.
Wala rin. Pero narinig ko sila Mina, tsaka sila Angel nagsasalita. Pati si Pau, tsaka ikaw. Si Yaya lang talaga hindi.
Oo, naririnig namin si Yaya.
Naririnig. Kaya laba. Yung mga sapat. Yaya,
Nagsasalita siya ngayon.
are you still alive?
Yaya, try mo kaya mo na mag-leave.
Pero naririnig ko si Yaya Robs. Nagsasalita siya ngayon.
Wala akong naririnig.
No! Totoo yun.
Oh, makakabalik ka ba? Binisan mo lang.
Try ko rin mag-left.
Sige. Paano ka mag-left? Ikaw ka nag-ano, Robs?
Ayun na siya.
Hello.
Pwede ba
Yan,
na?
naririnig na.
Yaya.
Hello.
Okay.
Okay,
Ano?
ulit.
Ulit.
Ulit. Yan. Kaso ikakat talaga yan.
Ay, oo nga. Yan mo.
Pero ang dami nating chikahan.
Hindi, pag pinresent natin, i-move na lang natin yung mga...
Sabihin mo technical difficulties siya lang. Okay, go.
Game na.
Go.
Next is about Filipino peace psychology. So after the dictatorship under the former President Ferdinand Marcos, it was believed that there's a transition periods happen on the following administration under the former President Aquino, Ramos, Estrada, and so on. So if there's a transition, meaning the Philippines experience political changes and internal conflicts too under the democracy. And two of the major political changes after the EDSA revolution are the weakening of the Philippine Communist Party due to tactical errors and seriously destructive infighting, and of course, a general lowering of the Red Scare among the citizenry or yung red tagging na tinatawag. And because of these political changes, mas tumaas yung democratic space at nagkaroon ng confidence yung mga tao, especially the civilians. The civilian leaders gain legitimacy kasi kaya naman naging subject nila yung military. And because of this political context, it gave rise to several research studies about conflict and peacemaking in the Philippines. And these studies focus on the meaning of peace, attitudes toward peace and violence, peaceful conflict resolution, collective political violence, peace education, peace organization, and as well as political trauma. Next slide. So, meaning of peace. According to Garcia 1994 and Ferrer 1997, the meaning of peace is more than the absence of war. Because peace includes justice, respect for life, equality, total well-being, and total human development. And there was a survey conducted among Filipinos about the meaning of peace. And there are several categories under it, but focus tayo on the result about the national dimension of peace. And the conclusion about is is Filipinos perceive peace as having an awareness of the nation's goals and working towards national development. So, in order for the Philippines to achieve peace, dapat ang bansa ay may progress. Nag-e-effort na magkaroon ng equality and justice, and of course, may pagkakaisa ang mga tao. Next slide. Next is about attitude toward peace and violence. Paris in 1994 wants to identify the underlying dimensions of attitudes towards peace and violence. And in the study of Paris, it revealed three dimensions. The first one is the power factor, wherein nandun wealth, force, at respect. Next is recognition of other, like time, patience, and listening. And the third dimension is justice, the social equity. Sinasabi rin sa study na yung gender at socio-economic status ng isang tao ay may kinalaman sa kanilang attitude toward peace and violence. Woman has more peaceful tendencies than men. And if you're one of the Filipinos with higher socio-economic status, then you have more peaceful attitudes. Next po. Peaceful conflict resolution. So most of the political conflict happen in the Philippines is expressed in the electoral arena, like yung mga election campaign, legislative involvement, constitutional involvement, and constitutional amendments. Nangyari din ang political conflict sa street politics, yung mga rallies, marches, strikes, tsaka sa mga underground activities, or yung mga armed encounters, city-based bombings, arson, and coups d'etats. And because of this violence context, para ma-resolve yung mga ganito mangyari sa Pilipinas, many Filipino researchers began to experiment with local ways of creating political peace. Two cases, there's even a lot of studies exist regarding peaceful conflict resolution. Two of these are the case studies that conducted in Eastern Samar and North Cotabato to determine the politico-psychological dimension of peacemaking. This study is a citizen-based that utilizing unarmed efforts of communities in conflict to stop armed encounters between government troops and the New People's Army within their territories, or yung mga NPA. Furthermore, several findings indicate that Philippine peacemaking can be enhanced by local creative ways of discussion and direct trial and error practice among political and military groups, and actively supporting peace-oriented local community leaders in their political bids for electoral victory and peace effort. Next slide. Collective political violence. In collective political violence, Gonzalez et al. On 1991 studied collective political violence, or the collective attacks by groups within a political community against a political regime. So, example of these groups is yung mga aktivista, mga street demonstrations, ganyan. Another example of collective political violence is the attacks of RMA, or Reform the Armed Forces Movement. Their notable attacks was the coup attempts after the People's Power Revolution. RAM was against Ferdinand Marcos, that they even attempt to bomb the Malacanang Palace during the events of the People Power, but they failed to do it and instead supported the events in EDSA that would eventually put Cory Aquino in the place of Marcos. But the RAM, after People's Power Revolution, were discontented with the lack of power of Aquino administration that forced RMA to do the coup attempts. Gonzalez et al. Suggested several ways for the government in order to minimize collective violence. First is maintaining an equity of benefits of economic progress, and especially not promising more than what the government can deliver. And there goes decentralization, having strong value formation, promoting military justice and punishment, following the proper military promotion process, and avoiding media sensationalism. Next slide po. Peace education. Montiel, 1996, studied organizations that conduct peace education. It was found that Philippine peace education focuses on inter-society forces, like the haves versus the have-nots. And this organization has a strong politico-economic dimensions. And their main concern for establishing and doing peace education is because of the social conflicts. Next is peace organization. According to Garcia, 1994, several Philippine social movements fights against injustice, oppression, and senseless violation in order to restore peace. So yeah, if you're really a Filipino citizen and you want a mundane and a peaceful country, you will surely make a move for the sake of everyone else. And fighting for what you believe in is the right thing to do. And for all of the organizations that were established, according to the study of Ferrer in 1997, 52 out of 102 of these organizations were set up during the post-Marcos era. At ang common goal lagi ng mga organization na ito ay may kinalaman for developing peace. Next slide. So last is political trauma. In political trauma, Montiel on 2000 proposed that situational issues need to be addressed because political environment and psychological well-being interact. In short, yung mga political na usapin, mga political na gawain, may kinalaman din sa psychological well-being ng isang tao. For example, yung mga within the state na war, yung tas tumatagal yung war than it was usually expected, pasok yan sa number 1, that traumas are not only highly intense and episodic, but are also prolonged and systematic. However, political context is not only a source of trauma, but also a source of healing. Like the Philippines, from the dictatorship and the nagkaroon ng democratic atmosphere, it caused a collective psychological healing for many Filipinos. Because from that transition, they can already express their views openly. Additional with this, psychological recovery occurs in unsafe and impoverished contexts. And also, many trauma survivors are not only victims but also a transformers of political context because they already experience what does it feels like. They are now more awake. That's why if we observe them, we can see that they have the skill of being a leader and an active shapers of political environment. Next po. So, next is ideological groups. Here, the research also look at the attitudes and values of different ideological groups in the Philippines. When we see ideological groups, they had shared belief system that provided an interpretation of the social environment as well as recommendation for how society should be organized and structured. In this case, values of Filipino student activists of two generations were studied on Montiel in 1991. These said Filipino student activists were the former student leaders of martial law and the EDSA youth protesters. So, ang na-observe, yung mga martial law leaders, mas binavalue nila yung daringness at excitement. Unlike sa mga EDSA youth leaders na mas importante sa kanila yung control at personal tranquility. In general, 6 central values were discovered. Ito yung control versus daring, attached affection versus detached intellectualism, spiritual kindness versus individual ambition, personal relationship versus socio-political relationship, tas personal tranquility versus exciting recognition, as well as self-pleasure versus transcendental. And on the study of Clamor in 1991, a factor analysis also revealed three dimensions of democratic attitudes. These are conservative progressive tensions. Next is political participation and distribution of resources. And lastly, diversity. Next po. So, women in politics. With two women having held the highest position in government as President of the Republic of the Philippines, which is the former President Corazon Aquino and the former President Gloria Macapagal Arroyo, because of them, these two former presidents gave a reason to researchers to also focus about the role of women in politics in the Philippines. So here in PH, it has been argued that politics is more the realm of men than women. The Palace in 1994 reported that women continue to be a minority in the political arena. In the 1992 elections, only 4 out of 24 senators are women, while women held only 10% of the House of Representatives as well as local positions. But patriarchal norms and values, as well as gender stereotypes, may explain the gradual increase in women's presence in politics. Gender stereotypes that portray women as weak, emotional, and insensitive, characteristics that people saw as undesirable in negotiating and decision-making that discouraged the voters from voting for women candidates. However, it was observed that female politicians who has been elected to public office position tend to be associated with male politicians. Like, there are family members, either wife or daughter of politicians, ganon. Just like the two former female presidents, we all know that Corazon Aquino is the widow of Senator Benigno Aquino, while Gloria Macapagal Arroyo is the daughter of the former President Diosdado Macapagal. Despite this, women have continued to participate in other aspects of politics, such as lobbying for causes, and the majority of these women have limited themselves to voting and joining rallies only for fear that in seeking public office, they would put themselves higher than their husbands, according to the Palace 1994.
So, for the local governance and Filipino empowerment, first, we will be tackling about the governance. So, it refers to the political and institutional procedures that govern decision-making and implementation. So, RA or Republic Act 7160 or Local Government Code. So, this gave more power to local officials according to Lacaba and Colonel 1995 and Nevres 1995. This is such as mayors and governors. So, this is founded by Mr. Melchor and Nacario Jr. This transferring control and responsibility of delivering basic services to the hands of local government units, which is the LGU. This code establishes the system and defines power of provincial, city, municipal, and barangay governments in the Philippines. So, majority of the ninth House of Representatives belongs to traditional political families, are landowners, and have a clear interest in large corporations. This is based on Clark 1993. So, nagkaroon ng connection sa political, ang business, and professional connections. So, for the empowerment, it means people having power and control over their own lives. Kumbaga, sa next slide please. Kumbaga sa Filipino word, ang katumbas ng empowerment ay pagbibigay ng lakas ng loob sa tao na magkaroon ng kontrol sa kanilang sariling buhay. So, isa si Fidel B. Ramos sa tumakbo na may plataforma about sa people empowerment. Next slide, please. So sa Ateneo Center for Social Policy and Public Affairs na nag-conduct ng 4 case study of people participation in social governance. This is according to Shalsita 1995. So, ang research na kinonduct na ay nagkaroon ng training about sa, next slide please, about sa self-awareness, managing human relations, team building, and technical and livelihood project development training. Next slide, please. At ang empowerment training na yon ay nagkaroon ng impact or mas naging better yung mga taong nakatanggap ng empowerment training in terms of productivity, social behavior, and level of community development dimensions. So, ibig sabihin ay naging malaking bagay yon ang naging malaking bagay ang pagkakaroon ng empowerment training or empowerment itself sa mga tao dahil sa mas napapaganda nun or napapaganda ng empowerment training na yon kung paano mag-handle ang tao ng mga bagay-bagay. That would be all. Thank you.
Okay. Whew! That was a long discussion, but I guess it is all worth it. And that's the end of Group 4's discussion about the social psychology of helping and politics. And before we end, we want to congratulate all the people that are all here for a wonderful semester. But of course, I am aware that the semester is not yet over. I guess we still have 2 to 3 weeks left to go. But we just want to let you know that you all, you all did your best and you are still doing all your best. So don't forget to tap your shoulder, guys, when things get hard, especially in academics. Do not push yourself onto your limits. Learn to take a break. Learn to be a tamad for a day, and learn to to do the things that you like. So do not be too harsh on yourself. Okay? Do not. Okay. And for Sir Mastoles, sir, we just want to let you know that thank you for a wonderful semester, and know that we've learned a lot from you, and we know that we will see each other. We don't know when, but yeah, we will see each other soon. So be safe wherever you are. And to end the meeting, again, this is the Group 4, and thank you for listening to our discussion today. I hope you learned a lot from us. God bless, keep safe, and again, good morning, and have a nice day.